In this video, I want to introduce you to discourse analysis. Now, we are not going to be able to go much below the surface of what discourse analysis can be. If you're familiar, you might be more familiar with the topic of the field than I am. But it's a highly diverse field that includes many seemingly unrelated perspectives. But as Green indicates, discourse analysis has at its core the idea that it's focused on the idea of language in use. Language in use. What that assumes, and what discourse analysis has taken up, is an awareness that language, written, spoken, uncommunicated language, any sort of communication between one person and another, always involves far more than the actual words being spoken. So let me illustrate by way of an example. I have 4 younger children. Yes, I don't sleep very often, but I have 4 younger children, and at my house every night, there comes a point at which I stand up and I say, "Okay, kids, it's bedtime." Now, those words in and of themselves don't necessarily mean anything. They could be a simple declarative sentence. "It happens to be bedtime, kids. Isn't that a neat fact? Look at the clock." But when I say those words to my children, there are issues of power at play. There are issues of our routine, our expectations. When I say it's bedtime, it means it's time for us to go brush teeth, use the bathroom, get drinks of water, get the toys you want, get the right blanket, get the right pillow, all the other excuses you might come up with. It's now time to get that rolling. Those words in and of themselves do not necessarily carry with them all of those implications. But in that discourse situation, and I'm going to come back to this in a second, discourse situation between me, my kids, at this time in our lives, at our house, it carries with it all those implications for reasons of power, the reasons of authority in our structure, expectations, and so forth. There's always more at play than just the words themselves. Now, if my children were to tell me, "Dad, it's bedtime," it wouldn't carry the same weight. It might carry different weight. It might indicate to them it's time for them to go get ready for bed, that they're tired, or so forth. If I said that to my wife, it's bedtime, that might just mean I'm going to sleep, you're welcome to stay up and do whatever you want. It doesn't carry the same authority. So discourse analysis is about exploring how language is actually being used, how it's in play. As you can imagine, that might have huge implications for the biblical text and how we read it. There are the words themselves, but there are always other dynamics, political, social, cultural, so forth. All these other dynamics in play. Now, again, we're not going to be able to dive too deeply into what discourse analysis is, but rather I wanted to tease out some of the implications for how we might read the Bible, especially in our work this quarter. One of the implications is this. Discourse analysis recognizes that humans are meaning-making creatures. Meaning-making. That is, humans strive to make meaning out of something that is before them, something presented to them. They try to fit it within a framework that explains it and makes sense of it. I want to read to you a quotation from some authors who write on the subject of discourse analysis in their book that is appropriately entitled Discourse Analysis. So I'm going to read this quotation. You will see it up on the screen. "The imperative need to find regularities, which Popper speaks of, coupled with Bartlett's effort after meaning, constitute a powerful expectation in human beings that what is said or written will make sense in the context in which it appears. Even in the most unpropitious circumstances, the natural reaction of man appears to be to make sense of any sign resembling language, resembling an effort to communicate. The natural effort of hearers and readers alike is to attribute relevance and coherence to the text they encounter until they are forced not to." Now, all that is to say this. If I say something to you, and if I say something else after that, you're inclined to make sense of what I'm saying. You're not assuming or taking for granted that I just speak at random and just utter incoherent, unrelated phrases. In fact, if I did that, you would probably assume I had some sort of psychological or psychiatric condition that compelled me not to make meaning. Humans, by nature, make meaning as long as they can. So we are compelled to make meaning of things. So an example, in case you're a bit confused, an example. I'm going to read to you two statements. First statement. John said, "I cannot believe that tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary already." Second statement. His wife, Sarah, turned, sadly, longingly, to the picture of their daughter. Now, as I read those two statements, if you were paying attention, in all likelihood, you assumed that the two were related. So John saying, "I cannot believe that tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary already," and then Sarah, his wife, sadly looking at the picture of their daughter, you may come up with you may make meaning of those two statements by envisioning a situation in which they lost their daughter 1 year ago. Now, that is not inherent to the statements I made. They could have been two unrelated statements. Those two statements could be used in many, virtually endless possibilities, other contexts. But when I put those two together, your brain naturally compels you to make sense of them in relation to one another until you are forced not to do that. All of that to say then, reading the biblical text, especially in light of some of what we've already begun to touch on regarding scholarly views on how the text might have come to be, that what we have as Genesis may really have originally been multiple other sources that have now been put together into the version we have before us, that we are compelled as readers of texts to make sense of a text as it stands until we cannot. Now, how we make sense of that will more or less look like what we are going to model as a close reading of the text, asking those questions that are provided in that handout regarding the text, the co-text, the context, and intertext. We start with the smallest frame possible to try to make sense of a particular statement, and we expand out to see its significance, and we make meaning of it until we absolutely cannot. This is what discourse analysis implies for the reading of the biblical text as Scripture. Now, so this is, again, we'll see this in our close reading of the text. And when we talk about the text and we talk about the discourse, we also envision what is called the discourse situation, as Green describes it. We pay attention to the discourse situation. So a text will naturally have multiple discourse situations. It will have the original act of communication between the one who wrote or compiled the text and the one to whom the text was addressed. But it will also assume newer situations in which that text now communicates with new readers. So we are compelled to pay attention to both of those discourse situations. So discourse analysis, language in use. It's all about making meaning until we absolutely cannot. We are compelled to make meaning, to make sense of what is before us. Excuse me. We will continue to explore this at various points throughout the quarter. But if you have any questions, certainly let me know. And otherwise, we will have it in operation as we look at close readings of the text.